Stick around and find out why we went through at least 6 sippy cups before we found the right one. Today we're talking about sensory processing disorder. What is it? And I'll give you some early warning signs to look out for. Hey there, everybody. It's Tracy from teachmetracy.com. On this channel, you're going to find videos all about the tips, tools, and tricks to thrive in a homeschool lifestyle. So what is sensory processing disorder? It's a condition that affects how the brain processes sensory information. People who have sensory processing disorder either have overdeveloped or underdeveloped sensory behavioral issues. There's no cure for sensory processing disorder because doctors have no idea what's causing it. So I'm just going to tell a couple of stories here, and maybe you can relate to this, maybe not. If you don't, I'll put the timestamps below so you can fast forward. When Eric J was probably 10 or 11 months old, we were trying to introduce the sippy cup. At first, we just determined he doesn't want to give up the bottle, so maybe that's the issue. So maybe we should just keep trying the same type of cup. Well, after about 2 weeks of flat out refusal, then the pediatrician suggested that we try a different one, right? So we tried ones that had a rubber spout, ones that had a plastic spout, ones that had handles, ones that had no handles, ones that were silicone, ones that were plastic, ones that were stainless, ones that had the rim. I forget what they call it, but it's the cup that has the center in it, and it's I think it's called a 360 cup. We tried that one too. Holy moly. It was intense. But I will tell you, at that time we were new parents, we had no idea that this wasn't the norm. We just thought, well, when you're going through these things and you're in the middle of these things, it doesn't occur to you that it might be a warning sign or it might be something that you need to keep an eye on. So finally, after, it might have even been the 7th, I don't know, but the 6th or 7th sippy cup that we finally tried worked. And so we stuck with that until he was finished with the sippy cup. At that point, he was becoming aware of seasonal changes and clothing and how the clothing was fitting him. So he had a hard time going from winter to spring or summer when the pants would get shorter. So I would put shorts on him, let's say around June or July. So it wasn't even in an in-between season necessarily. It was pretty warm outside. And so he would walk around and try to pull his pants down to make them longer. And when he was younger, before he could verbalize what was going on, he would just sort of adapt to it. It would take him a few weeks, and then he would just adapt to it, and it would be fine. We wouldn't have an issue until the next seasonal change. So at that time, anything with a tag started to bother him, so much so that he just would flat out refuse to wear anything with a tag. The socks had to be lined up exactly right, or he wouldn't put them on. He prefers the soft, minky fabric over certain other types of fabrics, such as denim or khaki. And to this day, he's 7 now, and his clothing of choice is usually athletic pants or some kind of fleece material. He flat out refuses to wear anything that has anything to do with a twill or a denim because he cannot stand the way it feels on his skin. So those are just a few of the examples that we started to notice pretty early on. He also likes to do a ton of crashing with his body. Like, he'll fling himself on the ground, not throwing a tantrum, but just because that is the impact that his body needs. It is the most bizarre thing I've ever seen. And when he was younger and doing these things, crashing into the ball pit or crashing, into the mulch on the playground, it doesn't really seem that odd because their kids are throwing themselves all over the place. But then when they become to be about 3 or 4, you start to think, I don't know, there might be something to this. And so all of these things that kids are experiencing, they take in different information when they're encountering the world that's around them. And it's not necessarily a bad thing if they have aversions to certain things. But when I was talking to our occupational therapist about some of these issues, her threshold seemed to be that when it starts negatively affecting kids' lives, at that point, you might want to seek some intervention so that you can provide your child with some coping skills. I mean, we all have sensory things that we prefer over other things. Sensory processing disorder, if one little thing is off, it will send these kids into the stratosphere. So, what does it look like when your child is overly sensitive? Well, I'll give you an example. In our case, extreme aversions to foods or being very picky about foods. I mean, when I was growing up, my mom had two things on the menu. You can take it or you can leave it. Those were the two things she had on her menu. So I always figured, fine, you put food in front of kids, they'll eventually eat it. Kids with sensory processing disorder are completely different. They will gag on certain foods. Other indications of overstimulation might be toe walking. And sometimes kids toe walk when they are first learning how to walk. But usually by the time they're 2, 3, they should not be toe walking anymore. Kids with sensory processing disorder often toe walk because they don't like to put the whole foot down on the surface they're walking on. And so they try to get away from that surface by walking on their toes as much as possible. We've already talked about this one before, but the third one that you might want to be aware of is any kind of complaints about clothing. And usually there's more than one. So sometimes a lot of people don't like tags in their clothes, right? I don't like an itchy tag either. Very easy to cut it out and then move on. But kids with sensory disorder, it's not a matter of removing the tag. They might then decide that the tag is associated with that particular item of clothing and then refuse to wear it. It's not just a matter of worrying about the tag. Sometimes it's, like I said, the socks. Sometimes it's certain fabrics. Sometimes it's problems with wearing appropriate clothing for the appropriate season too. Also, if they're overly sensitive to sound. Now, I'm not talking about somebody who will cover their ears or, make a face when they hear a loud sound. These are, if it's just a little bit louder than normal, these kids, it will send them into the stratosphere. And the same thing with visual. And another one might be balance issues. Okay. So now let's talk about understimulation. So they might be understimulated if they're chewing on everything in sight. Now I'm not talking about a toddler when they're teething, right? This presumably is after they have all of their teeth and they're chewing on their pencil, they're chewing on their jackets, they're chewing on their, I don't know, I've heard of kids chewing on their backpacks. Another indication might be crashing. They just randomly crash on stuff or randomly fling themselves on stuff. When my child goes to OT, a great majority of his time is spent either working through an obstacle course or he'll run and he'll crash on the crash pad, run and crash on the crash pad. And so I've had a couple of conversations with his occupational therapist about this because this is a very strange phenomenon to me. I don't understand why he does it. Every time she just assures me this is normal for him and it's just what his body needs. She has quite a few actually that she says that come to see her that have the same thing. So if they're doing a lot of crashing, that might be something to look into. Sometimes they don't recognize space. And get this one, kids that have underdeveloped sensory processing, they can spin without getting dizzy. Can you even imagine? I don't even know how that works. Where you can, I get dizzy thinking about spinning, right? So those are some of the early signs that you might be dealing with a sensory processing issue. And I'm not a medical professional, so in any of these cases, I recommend that you talk to your pediatrician, and your pediatrician can tell you which way to go. Often, a pediatrician will recommend you to an occupational therapist. And if you get a referral to your occupational therapist, most of the time, the occupational therapist will do a complimentary consult and they will tell you, look, this is where you stand. I'd love to hear in the comments if you have any funny or interesting sensory stories. I'm sure other parents would like to know because it is crazy sometimes dealing with some of these sensory issues and you think you've got them all handled and they come out of left field. They really do sometimes. So I'd love to hear any interesting sensory stories that you might have. I hope all of that helps. That's all I have for you this week. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.